title of my presentation is inspired by a proverb from Tanzania. Its full rendition in Swahili is, milima, milima haikutani, bali binadamu hukutana. Milima haikutani, bali binadamu hukutana. It translates as, mountains do not meet. Human beings meet. To understand its meaning, you have to know a little bit about a geological phenomenon called Mount Kilimanjaro. Standing at a height of 5,895 meters, or 19,341 feet above sea level, Kilimanjaro holds the record of being the tallest mountain in Africa, and it is the highest freestanding mountain in the world. Interestingly, though, contrary to popular perception, Kilimanjaro is not one mountain. Kilimanjaro is a cluster of mountains with 3 peaks. The twin sisters, known locally as Kibo and Mawenzi, and their distant sister, Shira. Imposing as they are in their majestic splendor, there is another intriguing aspect of their relationship, namely their perpetual inability to actually meet. Immobile, isolated, forlorn, their fate is unalterable. For the local community then, this detail about these geological siblings is loaded with symbolism. It offers an enduring lesson on the vital importance of encounter. People meet. Mountains, they don't meet. Speaking of which, Pope Francis of blessed memory declared in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti that, quote, life, for all its confrontations, is the art of encounter, end quote. For people who live in the vicinity of Mount Kilimanjaro, what Francis calls fraternity or encounter echoes a deeply, deeply prized and deeply held belief about the priority of relationship over isolation. They speak instead, the Chagas, they speak instead about the principle of Ubuntu, which exemplifies the singular capacity of the Muntu or Untu, that is a person, to encounter an other. This principle for them prioritizes inclusion over exclusion, community over competition, hospitality over hostility, dialogue over division, respect over domination. As a South African theologian, Gabriel Setiloane, put it, this principle of encounter is at the heart of what it means to be truly human. So when Pope Francis declared that, quote, each of us is fully a person when we are part of a people. At the same time, there are no peoples without respect for the individuality of each person. he was speaking Ubuntu. Umuntu, Gamuntu, Gabantu. A person is a person because of other people. I am because we are. In other words, encounter exemplifies what it means to be alive, flourish as a human person. Pope Francis, was unequivocal in his passionate advocacy for a culture of encounter, as he called it, as an antidote to the crisis of nationalism, polarization, conflict, hate-mongering, exclusion, and antagonism. To speak of a culture of encounter, he said, means, quote, that we as a people should be passionate about meeting others, seeking points of contact, building bridges, planning a project that includes everyone. This becomes an inspiration and a style of life. The subject of this culture of encounter is the people, not simply one part of society that will pacify the rest with the help of professional and media resources, end quote. And so, whether as praxis or as culture, a perceptible intentionality characterizes encounter. Intentionality. So consider, for example, the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, verse 25 to 37. Drawing on this familiar narrative, Pope Francis underscored in his exegesis the responsibility of love for others based on our shared humanity or Ubuntu. Such love, he argued, builds a universal fraternity beyond the consideration of the recipient's status, situation, origin, gender, or location. Universal fraternity, he said, entails suffering. It requires time to forge a new social bond of solidarity that tends to the vulnerability and fragility of others. Francis likened this community to what he called a polyhedral reality, composed not of isolated monads, but as, quote, a family that is stronger than the sum of small individual members, end quote. This reality, I believe, exemplifies Ubuntu par excellence because it is cemented by an inclusive social love that transcends narrow barriers, interests, and prejudices. If I might just stay a little while longer on this Good Samaritan narrative. In his encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, in 2005, Pope Benedict XVI also undertook an exegesis of the Good Samaritan, and at the end of which he concluded, quote, the parable of the Good Samaritan remains as a standard which imposes universal love towards the needy whom we encounter by chance, whomever they may be, end of quote. The needy whom we encounter by chance. While both Francis and Benedict concurred on the main lines of their respective exegesis, it was Benedict's qualification of the term encounter that really piqued my attention to the point of registering a slight difference of interpretation, though I would be very, very careful because I tread on unfamiliar ground when it comes to biblical exegesis. Certainly not with all the stalwarts who are in this room. But in my understanding, The Good Samaritan did not meet the wounded traveler by chance. While the priest and the Levite, we're told, deliberately switched lanes, the Good Samaritan made a conscious choice to persevere on the road that led him inevitably to an encounter with the wounded and abandoned wayfarer. Chance seems to me an insufficient catalyst, motivation, or rationale for the praxis of encounter. Simply put, more is required. However, Pope Benedict uncovered a deeper truth of what lies at the root of encounter. He pointed out that proximity to God is an impetus for proximity to people, especially broken and wounded people. As he eloquently stated, quote, "Those who draw near to God do not withdraw from people, but rather become truly close to them," end quote. So you can see the praxis of encounter does not only satisfy human desire, it is divine calling. Speaking personally, to repeat a story which is quite familiar to most people in this room, as a convert from African religion to Christianity, I was schooled in the culture of the primacy of human relationship. According to the tenets of this culture, the gift of self-identification, autonomy, and affirmation that enables me to say I ought not to turn me into what Pope Francis calls a hyperinflated individual or an isolated conscience. For to affirm my singular humanity is to acknowledge that I depend vitally on other people to fulfill the deepest meaning of my existence. My human potential flourishes through interactions with people. To be human, then, in this culture, is to be open. That is to engage the other in their irreplaceable distinctiveness and difference. My humanity, my being, is sustained by interdependence and relationality. Mountains do not meet. People meet. This vision of Ubuntu aligns with the culture of encounter and creative openness to the other to give us a vision of what Pope Francis calls, quote, the sense of belonging to each other and to the whole of humanity, the capacity to come together and work together against a shared horizon of possibility, end quote. In the mind of Pope Francis, fraternity rests on the culture of authentic encounters whose precondition is creative openness to the other. This uniquely African gift of Ubuntu empowers me as an individual to strive for the transformation of tensions and divisions that hinder relationship and to sow seeds of harmony, of peace, of justice, of reconciliation. Now more than ever before, I believe our world stands in dire need of the uniting vision of Ubuntu to repair the fabric of our shared humanity, which is being sundered recklessly by atavistic conflicts, ideological polarization, isolationist nationalism, malicious xenophobia. The list is long, and we know them. The fundamental premise of this principle recognizes the centrality of encounter with the other. And devoid of this truth, we risk a permanent retreat into a closed circuit, connected only by our shared fear of and hatred for the other. So is there a path forward? Is there a path forward? I believe then we come to the crux of this gathering. Yes, accompaniment, reconciliation. These are paths forward. As I see it then, there's strong belief in the paramountcy of relationship and relationality that lies at the heart of the praxis of encounter, doubles as a foundation for the practice of accompaniment. Doubles as a foundation and a motivation for the tasks of reconciliation, neither of which I would hasten to add happens from a distance, and I will return to this shortly. Being a Jesuit, you will forgive me if I do not tire of mentioning his name, but arguably for me, one of the most authentic modern-day exemplars of accompaniment as a manifestation of encounter was Pope Francis. In his often repeated and referenced striking imagery inspired by animal husbandry, and President de Bracco reminded us of that at the start of this conversation, Francis encouraged a ministerial model of shepherds with the smell of sheep. This image, for me, evokes the extravagant compassion, the self-sacrifice, and the solidarity of a pastoralist. So imagine for a moment, just imagine for a moment, what does it take to smell of sheep? What does it take to smell of sheep? In the mind of Pope Francis, I believe it wasn't about the pungency of a person's body odor or the acuity of a person's olfactory senses. Francis's sermon was really a metaphor for a church that ventures outside the cozy comfort of the sheepfold into the peripheral and precarious habitat of the wounded, the marginalized, and impoverished humanity. It was an invitation to encounter the other with an intent to engage, with an intent to accompany, to make route, to make way together. Particularly then, those whose condition we find nauseating to our settled senses and states of comfort, of privilege, and solemnity. In this vein, as many would recall, and President de Bracco reminded us of that, Francis famously declared his personal preference for a bruised, hurting, and dirty community on account of its relentless pursuit of mercy, of justice, and care for the earth on the streets rather than ensconced in palatial episcopal ghettos. Francis's professed preferential option for the periphery yields, in my opinion, a radical solidarity, both as a manifestation of the praxis of encounter and as an enabler of accompaniment. Pope St. John Paul II said as much in his encyclical Sollicitudo Rei Socialis when he declared, quote, "The exercise of solidarity within each society is valid when its members recognize one another as persons," end quote. umuntu, gumuntu, gabantu. He continued, quote, solidarity helps us to see the other. Whether a person, a people, a nation. Not just some kind of instrument with the work capacity and physical strength to be exploited at low cost and then discarded when no longer useful, but as our neighbor, our helper, to be made a sharer on par with ourselves in the banquet of life, which all are equally invited, end quote. And that is why in some cultures in Southern Africa, when people meet for the first time, the greeting translates as, I see you, and you see me. So taken together, then, these insights reveal a prophetic quality about the practice of accompaniment as a form of solidarity with the other whom we see and we encounter as a neighbor. A neighbor. John Paul II formulated it categorically when he declared that solidarity, quote, is not a feeling of vague compassion or shallow distress at the misfortune of other people, both near and far. On the contrary, it is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good, that is to say, the good of all and of each individual, because we are all really responsible for all, end quote. In the final analysis, to take on the smell of the sheep, we must be prepared to live like one. Or as a Rwandan proverb says, if you want cows, you must sleep like a cow. We cannot be with cows if we are afraid to step on cow dung, preferring instead the sterility and safety of distance. Accompaniment requires a measure of self-sacrifice and radical proximity. There is as well a synodal quality, I believe, to the practice of accompaniment. If, as we customarily declare, synodality is about walking and journeying together, then existential proximity matters. We cannot accompany the other from a distance. We cannot listen from afar. We cannot hear from a distance. To walk with individuals and communities, especially those who are vulnerable, excluded, marginalized, and impoverished, whose dignity has been violated, necessitates a certain level of comfort in proximity. Necessitates becoming comfortable being in their space. Like the Good Samaritan who put themselves in the space of the wounded. This face-to-face, side-by-side approach is how we, as persons and as church, imitate God. We imitate God who became flesh and made a dwelling among us. And so what you see, while conflict, violence, and crisis create zones of division and separation, encounter manifested in accompaniment creates geographies of peace and justice, compassion and solidarity, reconciliation and dignity. So, reconciliation. Like accompaniment, I premise the importance of reconciliation on the foundation of encounter. That is, encounter understood as a radical attention to and recognition of the singular worth and inalienable dignity of every single person. Unlike mountains, human beings meet. Bereft of the possibility or capacity for encounter, Kibo, Mawenzi, and their sister Shira in Arusha are insouciant, completely oblivious, unconcerned by tension or conflict or confrontation. So you see, encounter and relationship are actually zones of tension. For when human beings meet, we open ourselves to the possibility of division, of conflict, the possibility of estrangement. Kibo, Mawenzi, and Shira will never have that experience. Never. It's pointless to hold speculative court about why tension, why division, rather than nothing. Well, tension is a fact of life. It's a fact of life. It's a collateral of encounter. The deeper question is how we repair ruptured harmony and suture the severed bonds of humanity back together, and so initiate a process of healing. To encounter one another is to be vulnerable. Vulnerable to difference and divergence, for which the antidote is reconciliation. Robert Schreiter of blessed memory, and whose memory we celebrate today, observed in his pioneering work on reconciliation that, quote, reconciliation is an intensely sought but elusive goal. Part of the difficulty is the sheer enormity of the task, so great that it seems well nigh unachievable. For it is not only a matter of healing memories and receiving forgiveness, it is also about changing structures in societies that provoked, promoted, and sustained violence, end quote. The good news, as I said, is that reconciliation is a humanly possible enterprise. It is humanly possible. We have proven paths of reconciliation to repair damaged portions of human dignity, lives, and livelihoods. For example, in my cultural context, among the Edo people of southwestern Nigeria, reconciliation is a familiar, communally ritualized experience, almost on a daily basis. And I was privileged growing up to witness many, many such rituals of reconciliation in family and communal settings. The experience, as I recall it, rarely happens in an anonymous space. It always involves family. It always involves community. It always involves people. And the aim was always to restore broken relationships, to make restoration and healing its paramount goal and objective. This process facilitates wholeness and renewal for individuals and their community under the watchful eyes of our ancestors and spirits and deities. Robert Schreiter was right. It's well nigh unachievable, but it is possible. In this ritualized process of reconciliation, justice is served when the wrongdoing that destabilized social equilibrium is sanctioned and relationships are restored. Or as the political scientist David Philpott put it, quote, the central meaning of reconciliation is the restoration of right relationship, end quote. Desmond Tutu of South Africa, who led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, extends the point about the intricate connection between reconciliation and justice. And he states, quote, "In the spirit of Ubuntu, the central concern is the healing of breaches, the redressing of imbalances, the restoration of broken relationships, a seeking to rehabilitate both the victim and the perpetrator, who should be given the opportunity to be reintegrated into the community he or she has injured by their offense. Thus, we would claim that justice, restorative justice, is being served when efforts are being made to work for healing, for forgiving, for reconciliation." Viewed from this perspective, essentially, reconciliation is a praxis of encounter, whose primary purpose is the restoration of right conditions for people to meet again, including, as Schreiter said, changing structures in society that provoked, promoted, and sustained violence. The ritualization of forgiveness, reconciliation, and dispute resolution concretely manifest elements of traditional justice, practices of justice. Reconciliation and forgiveness through rituals and symbols are key to healing and changing of attitudes. In my cultural context, and as a resource for conceptualizing justice. I have a list of examples of reconciliation practices across certain parts of Africa, and I wouldn't go through all of them for the sake of time. But what I would like to say is that these examples illustrate the confluence of justice and reconciliation in the praxis of encounter. The key elements in all of the examples that I have found is that they prioritize encounter. They prioritize reparation. They prioritize transformation of relationship through reconciliation. And almost always underline the importance of storytelling. Telling the story of how we get here and creating the story of how we move forward. Considered as a praxis of encounter, reconciliation is a process whose ritualization evokes ethical and religious principles that enable people and their communities to bridge the rift of conflict and violence while ultimately seeking to prevent conflicts and preserve social cohesion. And in case you missed it, I would add that such social cohesion entails a cosmic dimension, exemplified in a relationship of solidarity and mutuality with creation. Religion in Africa, as I know it, the vital connection between human beings and the earth, our common home, is in fact the locus of encounter. So to recap, to say I am because we are is to embrace the horizon of relationship that is infinitely open and mutually enriching for humanity and for our common home. To say I am because we are is to fulfill my relationship with my own self, with others, with God, and with the earth. We ought to be duly alarmed. We ought to be alarmed to witness so many narcissistic, egotistic, and individualistic pathologies and passions ceaselessly remaking our world into a warring ground and brutalizing humanity. We ought to be alarmed because these are antitheses of reconciliation, of accompaniment and encounter. Today, we are witnessing, and we are witnesses to the alarming escalation of toxic digital communication, saturated in social aggression, verbal violence, and ideological upheaval, some orchestrated at the highest level of political authority. The plague of unbridled militarism, belligerent rhetoric, geopolitical antagonism, and epic fury not only assaults our humanity at its core, it also reveals a stark contrast between the virtue and practice of encounter, accompaniment, and reconciliation, and the vice of polarization. The difference between the God of reconciliation, justice, and peace, and the idols of war, violence, and hatred. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard was right to dare each one of us to summon the courage to say, I. But to avoid imprisoning this I in a hyper-inflated individual or isolated conscience, Austrian-Israeli philosopher Martin Buber reminded us that for my I to be authentic, it must be a starting point. It must be a common ground. It must be a mysterious center for encountering, accompanying, and reconciling with the other. Authentic faith celebrates this I-thou encounter. Even if thou art a stone, thou art a tree, thou art a work of art, or thou art God. In their document on human fraternity for world peace and living together, Pope Francis and Grand Imam Ahmed El-Tayeb teach us that, quote, faith leads a believer to see in the other a brother or sister to be supported and loved, end quote. If I cannot genuinely embrace the presence and pain of an other in encounter, dialogue, and friendship, then my faith is not courage, it's cowardice. My faith is not sacrifice, it's selfishness. To repeat a plea by Pope Francis, quote, we need a movement of people who know we need each other, who have a sense of responsibility to others and to the world, end quote. The courage to say I is the courage to encounter my sister, my brother, and creation. This kind of encounter is humanizing for women and men who are called to accompany one another and be reconciled with one another, with creation and with God. Paul VI taught us many years ago that, quote, people must meet people. Nation must meet nation as brothers and sisters, as children of God. In this mutual understanding and friendship, in this sacred communion, we also begin to work together to build the common future of the human race, end quote. I will end with a confession. The keen observer would have noticed the utter lack of reference to perhaps the most consequential issue of our time, namely the rise of artificial intelligence. This accelerating ascendancy compels us to reflect on and rethink critically what it means to be human, to be in relationship, and the future of labor, the future of learning, the future of creativity, the future of human species. In other words, as Pope Francis framed it in his message for World Communications Day in 2024, this question, quote, elicits deeper questions about the nature of human beings, our distinctiveness, and the future of the species Homo sapiens in the age of artificial intelligence, end quote. The praxis of encounter is incessantly constrained by a technological juggernaut that threatens to upset fixed notions of who we are irrevocably. Irrevocably. Milima haikutani, bali binadamu hukutana. But what if the other is a bot or a chatbot, simulating human identity, simulating human behavior, desires, emotions, and needs, with an ever-increasing propensity to go rogue and wrest its autonomy from the control of human intelligence? What if? If this encounter with an algorithmic monster is as sinister and intractable as many warn it is becoming, is it by that same token anti-human? Is it by that same token irredeemable? Is it by that same token a threat to relationality? Well, that, my friends, will be the subject of another gathering. Thank you very much.